Lord of Mysteries. Fire of Destruction Chapter 141 to 160. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. The three of them saw the man who was sitting further away from them. Despite sitting, he seemed to be someone tall. He also had a strong body and they could see that his hair was red. The most curious thing about this man is that he was wearing a very strange black robe. Audrey just puffed her cheeks at the man's laughter, unable to help feeling offended, but before she could say anything, the man spoke. Miss, you wish to become a Beyander but do not wish to accept the price that comes with it. How do you plan to become one if you are not willing to make the sacrifices it demands? Although of course I understand the fact that you don't want to lose your freedom, I really do, but that's the best option. Let's say the others are a bit ugly and I don't think someone like you wants to accept them. The man's voice was rather deep and dripping with provocation, and Audrey had to take a deep breath to steady herself. But what he had told her was true, so softly biting her lower lip, Audrey just asked. Sir, I would like to know what those other options are if possible. The man just let out another laugh as he nodded. It will be my honor, miss. Apart from the option that the gentleman gave, there are three others, the first being that you join an evil organization or an evil church and receive the formula to become a Beyander. The second being that you become a pirate or join a pirate of high name. Of course that would mean that you have to abandon your current life as you know it and live the rest of it with a price on your head and in fear of let other pirates defeat your ship and give you a very bad time, the man said with a dark and amused tone, sending a chill down Audrey's spine. Even Joe wanted to make himself more comfortable in his seat, but that would damage the image that he created as a powerful and mysterious entity, so he just maintained his position without changing anything. Audrey processed the information and she liked neither of them, joining an evil church. Never. Her belief in the goddess was strong, to become a pirate. She would never abandon her family, she loved them too much to do that. Trying to think of what to do, she realized that the man never said the third option, so puffing out her cheeks she spoke, hiding her annoyance. Sir, then what would be the third option? The third option would be that I or the man in front of you sell you the formula for the potion. What do you think? Which of the three do you prefer? The man said with a small dark chuckle, causing Alger to clench his fists as he shot him a discreet look to this man, and one of Audrey's delicate eyebrow tremble with anger. This man is a bully. Aren't you afraid of what I as the master of this place can do to punish you? Are you so brave? Thought Joe, whose corners of his mouth were trembling strongly. I choose the third option, sir, Audrey replied, and her voice was shaking with anger, which made the man in the robe let out a louder laugh. Great. What do you think, sir? Does it seem like a good business opportunity? The man spoke to Alger, making the blue-haired man only let out a strong sigh to calm down. This guy is driving me crazy, thought Alger, but at the same time he nodded. Fine with me, sir, he replied, looking at the man, and then he shifted his gaze to Audrey. I have 2 sets of sequence 9 potion formulas, he said grimly, and Audrey nodded. Which 2 sets? The girl asked, obviously knowing what it meant, unlike Joe who didn't know what was sequence 9. Alger only cast a discreet look at the man farthest away, and seeing that he was only leaning on the chair, he only spoke without haste. And just like in the original story, Alger told Audrey about how humanity used potions to get powers, then where the names came from, and finally he told her that he had spectator and sailor and explained the abilities of both. Audrey listened to all this carefully, the anger from before being replaced by the excitement of becoming a Beyander. When Alger finished speaking, Audrey, he and Joe turned their gazes towards the man who was leaning on the chair, and seeing that he was being watched, he just gave an exaggerated sigh while stretching. This made the trio want to hit the man, but he finished stretching and looked at Audrey with a small smile. Is it finally my turn? Perfect, I'll do this quickly. Miss, I have 3 sets of sequence 9 potion formulas, being Hunter, Seer and Bard. Hunter. They are master trackers, master of creating traps and excellent hunters. They also have a good physical increase, be it reaction, agility, strength, speed, natural healing speed and resistance. Seer. The Beyonders of this path do not have any physical increase, but spiritually, they are masters of all kinds of divination methods, including astrology, cartomancy, spiritual pendulums, spiritual numbers, and scrying. They also possess spiritual vision and danger intuition. Bard. They can imbue courage, strength, and agility for themselves and their allies through their singing, a job that brought about devotion and submission. When he finished saying that, the man had a smile on his face. Which one interests you more, miss? He asked Audrey, who was somewhat a little hesitant, and Alger observed this with a frown. All this happened before the eyes of the hidden Joe, who couldn't help but sigh internally. He's definitely a bully. Seer's abilities certainly sound very useful, but I don't think I can use them as much as the spectator, Audrey thought as she bit her lower lip, but after a few moments she made up her mind. Turning to look at the man dressed in that strange black robe, Audrey spoke. Sorry, sir, although Seer's abilities are interesting, I'm much more interested in spectator. The man just nodded while shrugging. I don't have a problem, miss. He replied nonchalantly that he lost a deal, and Audrey was a little disappointed that he had no other reaction. Alger heard that and could barely hide his proud smile for winning the competition. Audrey turned to look at Alger and she asked, what do you wish to trade for the formula? At least 100 milliliters of ghost shark blood, Alger replied quickly as if he had already prepared the answer. Audrey nodded vigorously and asked worriedly, if I can get it, and I'm saying if, how do I deliver it? How can you promise me that you can give the potion formula to me in exchange for the ghost shark's blood, as well as the authenticity of the formula? Alger just replied calmly, I'll give you an address. I can mail it to you or say it directly here, once I receive the ghost shark's blood. Saying that, he shifted his gaze to Joe, who was sitting upright on the seat of honor. Sir, the fact that you brought us here shows that you have tremendous strength unimaginable to us. None of us would dare to violate a promise with you as a witness. That's right, Audrey said with excitement. If only you knew that Joe right now is nothing more than a malnourished guy and not the all-powerful entity you imagine. I imagine what face would you have? Thought Adrian with a flat face as he looked at the seated Joe, who maintained his same posture without showing changes. Audrey turned her body and looked at the figure covered in gray mist earnestly. Sir, please be the witness of our trade. Adrian could see the exact moment when Audrey realized that she was being extremely impolite. This caused an amused smile to form on the redhead's face, who had to use his right hand to cover it. Meanwhile, Audrey hastily asked, Sir, how should we address you? Alger nodded gently and repeated the same question earnestly. Sir, how should we address you? Adrian also nodded and looking at Joe asked, how should we refer to you, sir? At the question, Adrian saw how Joe began to gently rap the bronze table with his fingers. He watched as Joe leaned back, retracted his right hand, crossed all 10 fingers, tucking them under his chin. He gave the trio a faint smile. You may refer to me as. When he said that, he paused for a moment. Joe said amiably and calmly, the fool. The answer soon emanated through the great hall, dispelling the gray mist. However, the voice still resounded in the hearts of Audrey and Alger. Even Adrian felt his heart tremble and a huge smile formed on his face. What a presentation! What a performance! Damn, even though I know this is a shot into the air that hit the target, I still can't help but feel chills. After a few seconds of silence, Audrey rose from her seat, held her skirt slightly, and bent her knees, bowing to Joe. Honorable Mr. Fool, could you please allow me the liberty of requesting you to be a witness to our trade? It's nothing, Joe replied in a way that equalized his status. It is an honor, Mr. Fool, Alger said, standing up, bending his back slightly with his right palm on his chest. Joe lowered his right palm and smiled. Go ahead, both of you. Alger nodded as he sat up and looked at Audrey. Adrian saw all this with a huge smile on his face, and he was using his right hand to hide it. This is just as epic as it is fun, or damn, if only Joe knew, he would never do another meeting again. Alger suddenly turned to look at him for a few moments, though, then got up from his seat to look at Joe and repeated the process of slightly bending his back and placing his right palm on his chest. Mr. Fool, I would like the deal between me and the lady to be a private one. When he said this, the smile on Adrian's face froze and Joe simply thought in alarm. And how am I supposed to do that? Thinking quickly, Joe tried to control the gray mist like he did before, and it wrapped around Adrian, not allowing the redhead to see or hear anything. Fuck you, Alger, Adrian thought with a twitching eyebrow at being separated. It worked. Joe thought with a sense of accomplishment, but on the outside he just gave Alger a small smile. It's done, he said calmly, causing Alger to bend his back again, but this time he went a little deeper. Thank you very much, Mr. Fool. With that said, Alger sat back down and looked at Audrey, who had a smile as she looked towards where the man was. If you can obtain the ghost shark's blood, get someone to send it to the Warrior and Sea Bar at Pelican Street, in the White Rose Borough of Pritz Harbor. Tell the boss, Williams, that it's what the captain wants. Once I acknowledge receipt, will you be given an address to mail the potion formula, or do you want me to tell it to you here directly? Asked Alger to Audrey, who thought for a few moments before answering with a smile. I'm going to choose the safest method. Let's do it here. Although it's a test. To my memory. With that said, Alger repeated the same process and spoke to Joe. Mr. Fool, our deal is done. Joe just nodded, and again he controlled the gray mist so that the redhead could see and hear again. Finally, thought Adrian, annoyed inside, but outside he only had a sweet smile. With the return of the man in the strange robe, Audrey turned to look at Joe with her eyes shining and spoke with interest. Mr. Fool, wouldn't you mind making a few more attempts like this? Alger listened to the suggestion calmly, and he too was tempted by it. Mr. Fool, don't you find gatherings like these interesting? Although your powers surpass our imagination, there are certain domains that you don't understand or excel at. The person in front of me is obviously a young lady of lofty stature. I'm not sure what is the other man, but he seems like someone strong with contacts. I also have my only set of experiences, insights, means and resources. Perhaps the day will come when the three of us can help you complete something trivial that is inconvenient for you. And finally, Adrian just let out a small laugh as he pointed at Audrey. A low and noble. This chilled Audrey, then he pointed at Alger. A pirate from the Church of the Lord of Storms. This made Alger also freeze and look in shock at Adrian, who pointed to himself. And lastly, a member of the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom. Then Adrian spread his arms as he spoke again in a much more energetic tone. Mr. Fool, doesn't a trio with different backgrounds seem like something fun and interesting to watch? Wouldn't you love to see how far this attempt of yours can go? Adrian's voice echoed through the great hall, making Audrey, Alger, and Joe's hearts pound with emotion. Joe only maintained his posture while placing a hand to his chin in thought. From the moment he heard the suggestion, he had already weighed the pros and cons. He thought he had already made a decision until that man in the strange black robe spoke, scaring him a little. While this meeting would open up a huge channel of information and resources for me, due to the existence of that man, my mask could fall off if I make a false step. After all, it seems that he hit the nail on the head regarding the identity of the two others, and they barely spoke. Thinking for a while longer, Joe made a decision. Ads by PubFuture. This is too important of a channel to throw away. Who knows how long it will take me to summon other people with so many resources. Nothing is without risk in this life. If I have to act harder to maintain this mask, so be it. With his decision made, Joe reached out his right hand and began to wrap the long table gently with his finger. He was in control of the summoning and firing gathering, so the danger of exposure was within the confines of his control. Finally, he stopped touching the table as he smiled at the anticipated, perturbed and amused looks of the trio in front of him. I am a person who likes a fair and equal exchange. Your help will not go unrewarded. Every Monday at 3 in the afternoon, try your best to be alone. After I make a few more tries and figure out some things, perhaps you can apply for a leave of absence ahead of time. You will no longer need to worry about being in inappropriate situations. This was his way of accepting Audrey, Alger and Adrian's suggestion. Audrey had just turned 17, having been cared for all her life. She had the character of a young girl. So she couldn't help but clench her fist, gradually pumped in front of her chest when she heard the fool's reply. Without even waiting for a word from Alger or Adrian, she spoke excitedly with her eyes shining. Then, should we give ourselves code names? After all, we can't use our real names in conversation. I may not be able to fool Mr. Fool regarding my true identity, but the man in front of me possesses some danger, let alone the man in the strange robe. He is a threat. Good idea, Joe replied in a relaxed and calm manner, but using the corner of his eye to look at the man in the robe, who had an amused smile. You are the Mr. Fool who is derived from the tarot cards. So, as a fixed, long-term, and secret gatherings, we should be uniform with our designations. Yes, I will also choose one of the tarot cards. Ads by PubFuture. Her tone slowly turned joyous. I have decided, my designation shall be Justice. It was one of the 22 major arcana tarot cards. What about you, sir? Audrey cheekily smiled at her partner in front of her. Alger frowned slightly before immediately relaxing it. The Hanged Man. It was another major arcana card. And finally, what about you, sir? Audrey asked, this time the man who was further away from them. Alger and Joe also looked at the man who let out a weak laugh. I choose the Chariot. The voice of the one now identified as Mr. Chariot was dripping with emotion and he had a sharp smile on his face. Okay, then we can be considered the founding members of the Tarot Club. Audrey was the first to blurt out happily before looking up in fear at the gray mist-shrouded Joe. Is that all right, Mr. Fool? Joe just shook his head in amusement. You can decide on such trivial matters by yourselves. Thank you, said Audrey, who was obviously very thrilled. Finally Audrey let out an excited sigh and spoke. I heard that tarot cards were created by Emperor Russell as a game. In fact, doesn't it come equipped with the power to divine the future? Alger, before answering, gave Adrian a discreet look, and seeing that the man was leaning back in the chair again, he looked at Audrey again while he answered calmly. No, most of the time, divination comes from oneself. Everyone has something spiritual in themselves. Alger explained to Audrey the use of tarot cards as a divination tool and how all people had spirituality but ordinary people were not able to understand the signs they received. Audrey listened intently to this while Joe was paying as much attention as possible to Alger's explanation. While Adrian, these pillars have a certain similarity with the pillars of ancient Greece, like those used in the temples of their gods. Adrian kept looking at the pillars carefully, completely ignoring Alger's explanation. When the pirate finished explaining, Audrey nodded. I got it, but then she emphasized. That's not what I meant. I'm not doubting the tarot cards, but I heard that Emperor Russell had actually created another set of cards, secret and mysterious ones. Hee. Before she could continue explaining what she was referring to, she heard Mr. Chariot's deep laugh. Turning her gaze, she saw how the man was even covering his mouth with his hand. Her eyebrow twitched again with anger and she pouted her cheeks, but again before she could say anything Chariot stepped forward. So you were referring to those cards, Miss Justice, said the man as he let out another laugh, but Audrey's attention was focused on something else. What is he laughing so much about? Does he know anything about these legend cards? Tucking her skirt under the table to steady herself, Audrey looked doubtfully at Adrian as she asked. Do you know anything about those cards, Mr. Chariot? I do know something about them, Miss Justice, and let's make it short, they do exist. Adrian responded curtly, and this information made Audrey quite excited while Alger and Joe listened to everything with curiosity. Russell saw the blasphemy slate and based on it he created 22 cards that hide the deep mystery of the 22 paths to the divine. Adrian said mysteriously. 22 paths to the divine, repeated Audrey with a longing tone. At that moment Joe felt a strong pang in his head and the headache that was bothering him had worsened. He managed to feel that his connection to the stars was slipping from his grasp. Well, that would be it for today's meeting, Joe said in a deep voice, and this caused Adrian to let out an inward sigh of disappointment. I would have liked to have bothered them more, but I think today is enough. I don't want them to get tired of me so fast after all, Adrian thought with a small smile as he made a slight bow. By your will, Mr. Fool. Alger repeated the same process, but he bowed deeper. By your will. By your will. Audrey repeated the same process as the Hanged Man. Joe, while cutting the connection with the Crimson Stars, he said with a smile. Let us look forward to the next gathering. As he listened to that, Adrian's vision was blinded by a crimson red to later be replaced by the sight of his table with its plate of scrambled eggs and cold toasted bread. He still had the cup in his hand, but all the cafe was gone. Come on, seriously, Adrian said in exasperation when he saw that his lap was completely wet with coffee. I should have been harder on you, Mr. Fool. Interrupting someone in the middle of their breakfast is not nice, whispered Adrian, who could only sigh and quickly finished his breakfast before going to the bathroom to take a shower. With a clean towel in one hand and a clean change of clothes in the other, Adrian's mind returned to the more important issue. I still don't understand how it is possible that I could have attended the first tarot club. With his mind clouded by doubt, Adrian opened the bathroom door and entering, placed the clothes and towel aside and then looked at himself in the mirror. His shirt and pants, not to mention his underwear, were wet. His white shirt had a huge brown stain on it. That will be difficult to remove, the redhead thought bitterly when he saw the stain. Even Adrian could feel his crotch sticky, so in disgust he started to take off his clothes. First, starting with his pants and underwear, because it was what bothered him the most, he began to unbutton his shirt. When he was going for the second button, something very strange caught his attention. Even with that shirt on, he took it off his neck and holding it in his hand and in front of his eyes, Adrian was looking at his necklace. The beautiful necklace that resembled the tip of a red spear and was well preserved, now had a broken appearance with multiple cracks all over the body. Also, the beautiful red color it had was replaced by a rust red color, similar to the color left by the blood when completely dry. It looked as if it had aged 100 years from one moment to the next and now looked like an ancient relic one would find buried in the sand of a very hot desert. Touching the rough texture of the necklace with his fingers, Adrian only frowned with doubt and an uncomfortable sensation throughout his body. It turns out that my necklace was the VIP pass to enter the tarot club. Looking at the necklace, Adrian's frown deepened. This necklace I have had all my life, and in the end it turned out to be an object stained with the aura of Saphira Castle. According to the orphanage caretaker, this is the last thing my parents left me. Adrian's uneasy feeling only deepened as he stared out his bathroom window at the cloudy backland sky. Who were my parents? Were they just normal people, or was there something special about them? And who really is Adrian Kenway? The redhead said to the air, but there was no one to answer his question. Turning away from the window, Adrian returned his gaze to the necklace in his hands and sighing, he sat on the toilet so he could think better. Since I woke up in Adrian Kenway's body, I have never given more importance to his life since what happened on the ship. I thought he was just an orphan who was looking for glory in becoming a pirate, but he paid the consequences. Sighing again, Adrian put a hand to his forehead and began to rub it. It turns out that Adrian's life has more mysteries which I didn't even pay attention to. Closing his eyes, Adrian relaxed his body and mind and began to search again for the memories of this body. Only this time he searched much deeper. Slowly visions and memories began to come and Adrian began to analyze one by one. Remember, Adrian Kenway, birthday September 1st, 21 years old, born in the Fasak Empire, raised in an orphanage of the Church of the God of Combat. The caretaker of the orphanage was called Antonella. She said that my mother left me the necklace before she died. The grave of my parents is in the Fallen Warriors Cemetery. My mother's name was Rosa and my father was Gabriel. Taking his free hand to his chin, the redhead tried to find something special about it but couldn't find it no matter how hard he searched. This is all I can get for now. The only way to get more information is to go to Fasak and ask Sister Rosa directly. Shaking his head, a wry smile formed on his face. That is impossible for now, and I still have work to do here. I can only leave this for later. Looking at the necklace in his hands, Adrian just put it back around his neck. Now that it has lost the aura that stained it, it has become a simple rusty necklace. There is no danger in wearing it, and after all, it is the last thing the mother of this body left me. It would be a shame not to wear it. With the necklace around his neck, Adrian changed the subject to another that was perhaps much more important. Originally I thought that my broken soul would have been restored after a few days of being resurrected, but thanks to the Tarot Club now I know that it is not the case. A short empty laugh escaped Adrian, who had to cover his face. Why did I even think that something like the damage I saw could even heal with just a few days of rest? That was stupid. My soul is still broken and only one reason comes to me for that. My soul doesn't belong in this dimension, so even though the bastard who brought me here is powerful enough to take me from my world, he couldn't do it without consequences. The redhead clenched his fists tightly while gritting his teeth, and the hatred he already felt for the bastard only grew even more. It's not even the fact that he chose me, but he grabbed someone from another world in another dimension. Couldn't you grab someone from this one? Are you so useless and incompetent? My soul was greatly damaged in the transmigration process, being torn to pieces, and maybe the only reason it's still together is because of the same bastard. The bastard maybe already expected that, and that's where that strange robe should come in. Taking a few short breaths to calm down, Adrian thought more coldly. That black robe is very strange, and I barely know of some of the abilities it has. The most important is the fact that it keeps me together at all times. Now I am a broken ceramic vase that this robe takes care of preventing it from breaking. It even has the ability to almost completely hide the aura of the City of Calamities, although according to what Will told me this is only temporary. if I continue advancing in the sequences, the aura will increase and the robe will no longer be able to hide it. While thinking, Adrian supported his head on his right hand while his red eyes looked at nothing. Perhaps another of this robe's abilities is that no divination will ever locate or reveal any information about me, considering how Erodes doesn't even dare to look at me. Perhaps the level of this black robe is at least the level of a demigod or maybe even higher. The moment the thought of the robe's possible level crossed his mind, Adrian shook his head. But if this is so, then how did Nathan manage to find me? Are there any requirements that must be met? There must be much more to this robe that I am not aware of. As he thought about what other ability it could have, the memory of the visit of a certain Nighthawks came back to his mind. Another ability should be to maintain lucidity in dreams. That's why I noticed Watson's visit in my dream the first time. Also, the material it seems to be made of. Adrian may not have been able to feel that he was wearing the robe when he was at the tarot club, but he was very familiar with the material in it. I'm sure it's made of the same material as that space of absolute darkness that I saw when I died. Perhaps what allowed my resurrection was that strange black robe. But if so, why did I have to find my body and touch it in order to resurrect it? In that space of darkness, it's not short of a miracle that I found it in the first place. Why use such a dangerous method? And if the robe really is in charge of my resurrection, then what was that light that came out of my body? What does it mean? Before more questions began to form in his mind, the spirituality of the redhead yelled at him to stop. Surprised by this, Adrian reacted quickly and tried to empty his mind of any thoughts, but that was easier said than done. Pyromaniac is not a sequence specialized in warnings sent by spirituality, he thought with a cold sweat covering his body. If his spirituality screamed in such a way, then he was too close to thinking of something very dangerous. Slapping his face hard to focus, Adrian tried again to empty his mind. It was 9:30 when Adrian left his house and was now in a carriage on his way to Hillston Borough, where after 2 weeks he would finally have classes with Isengar again. Click-clack. While he was in the carriage, Adrian was still somewhat uncomfortable from what had happened before, so now he is opening and closing hangover time to calm down. Click. Squeezing a fireball is much more calming, but this already helps me distract myself. Clack. Although the blinking of the pocket watch distracted him, it annoyed the driver who was shooting him several glances. Obviously Adrian knew this but didn't care. As he tried to think of anything else, he couldn't help but remember his performance at the tarot club, which caused a mischievous smile to form on his face. Joining the tarot club so early might have been totally an accident, but that doesn't mean I didn't take advantage of it. Click. The personality that I decided to use within the club would be the know-it-all bully type who does not and will not mince words to provoke all the members. Audrey and Alger's reactions were so funny after all. Clack. Remembering how Audrey and Alger were glaring daggers at him caused a short dark laugh to come out of him, which made the driver who was glaring at him freak out and stop looking at him. Come on, my laugh isn't that bad, thought Adrian, amused when he saw the reaction of the driver who was sweating cold. Letting out another laugh, Adrian looked out the window at the streets of Backland while the driver just quickened the horse's pace. Ads by PubFuture. Why did I have to lift a crazy man? Thought the driver, resigned. I hope you haven't forgotten to study in the weeks we didn't have class, my student, Isengar said calmly as he took a puff from his pipe, and Adrian just smiled in response. He had arrived at the detective's house a few moments ago and had been received by the servant. It's been a quiet few weeks, teacher. I must say that I needed this break, but I'm ready to resume classes, the redhead lied skillfully, and Isengar just nodded. This wasn't a complete lie after all. Adrian Kenway did have a pretty uneventful week, staying home all day to sleep or eat, while James Holmes had an extremely busy 2 weeks, from surviving an ambush and fighting back, to robbing and destroying a gang, of exploring a human carnage and surviving a huge explosion, and in the process discovering a hidden devil and reporting it to the 3 churches to deal with. Not knowing any of these facts, Isengar just took another puff on his pipe and spoke. That's good to hear, Adrian. After what happened you needed a break. Putting that aside, this time we'll study something different. Raising a red brow, Adrian watched as Isengar blew out some smoke. Do you know what spirit vision is? Isengar asked with a small smile, and Adrian's eyes widened slightly at this. Yes, I know what it is, teacher Isengar. Spirit vision allows a beyander to glimpse into non-physical parts of a human. They can observe the auras exuded by the ether body or the ether body itself, which allows them to discover the presence of any being that has a spiritual body, either by its intensity, brightness, and color. Isengar nodded and asked with a raised eyebrow. That is correct, my student, so I guess you already know how to use spirit vision. Unashamedly, Adrian gave Isengar a smile as he answered. No. Ads by PubFuture. Adrian's response made Isengar's eyebrow twitch and he nearly broke his pipe with his grip. Giving a small sigh, Isengar gave Adrian an awkward smile. Considering you know what it is, I'm seriously surprised that you don't know how to use it. Adrian sighed as he shrugged. It's not for lack of trying, teacher. No matter how many times I tried, I couldn't even activate it. He had already tried to use the same method that old Neil had used to teach Klein, but no matter how hard or how many times he tried, he couldn't activate the spirit vision. This had made him think that there may be different ways to learn spirit vision and that the method used by old Neil and Klein was the best for the seer and mystery prior, not for a hunter like him. Oh, Isengar at the information put a hand to his chin while raising an eyebrow. Could you tell me which method you were using? The detective asked curiously and Adrian answered. Listening to the explanation of the redhead, Isengar only nodded from time to time while a smile formed on his face, and when Adrian finished his explanation he just laughed. This made Adrian look at him with a flat face. My student, that method does work. The problem is that it is much more oriented towards the beyonders of the seer and mystery prior pathways. If any beyander of the hunter's path tried to use this method to activate their spiritual vision, they would never succeed. This is due to the enormous difference in spirituality between one and the other. In fact, hunters can only learn spirit vision in sequence 8, but it would be practically useless due to their weak spirituality. It is better for a hunter to be sequence 7 to be able to use it due to the increase in power and amount of their spirituality. Adrian listened to all this with a flat face, and at the end of the explanation he spoke in an awkward voice. So in all those attempts I was trying to collect water in a strainer. Exactly, Isengar replied with a smile while one of Adrian's eyebrows trembled. Adrian still had a quivering eyebrow while Isengar watched this with a small smile. Well, at least now I know, Adrian reasoned, trying to ignore the fact that he had wasted a lot of time trying to use a method that had never worked. Then teacher, how could I activate the spiritual vision? He asked, trying to leave that episode behind. Isengar rose and took another puff on his pipe as he made his way to the lamps in the room. First, I have to say that it's a relief that you don't know how to use it, because that would mean that my preparations were in vain. There was some relief in the words of Isengar, who stood next to the lamp. The method for a hunter to use his spirit vision for the first time is quite an interesting and even unique method, but first, Adrian, can you tell me what are the herbs I used in my pipe? Adrian nodded. Isengar had spent a long time releasing quite a lot of smoke, so much so that that was the only thing he could smell in the room. It seemed that Isengar this time, instead of the usual tobacco he used this time, he had used herbs. Among them he identified moonflowers and night vanilla. Raising an eyebrow at the detective who understood this, he took another puff on his pipe and blew another puff of smoke and finally extinguished the pipe and took something out of his pocket. The best way for a hunter to activate his spirit vision for the first time is to first stimulate 4 of his senses. When he said this, he threw what he had in his hand to Adrian. He caught it without problems. Opening his hand, he saw that it was a sweet, and from the smell it was strawberry flavored. Suck on the sweet and make sure you savor it. While saying that, Isengar turned off the lamp, darkening the room, but Adrian had night vision so he could still see as if the lamp was still on. Thanks to this, he saw how Isengar went to the record player and turned it on, allowing a soft melody to start playing in the dark room. Now I want you to focus all your attention on me. Don't think of me as your teacher but as a prey that will be your dinner. While you do that, don't forget to pay attention to everything that happens around you. Ads by PubFuture. Nodding, Adrian did what the detective asked, staring at him, while he also listened to the soft melody, smelled the smoke from the herbs and felt the taste of strawberry in his mouth. Slowly his 4 senses were coordinated and he also noticed how a white aura began to appear around Isengar. Teacher, I am seeing a white aura around you. Isengar nodded as he moved to the other side. That would be my aura. Since you are not a seer or a mystery prior, that will be the most you will be able to see. You will not be able to see anything other than the auras of others. I understand, teacher. Adrian nodded as he followed the detective with his gaze. So this is spiritual vision. It's like eagle vision but a little worse, compared Adrian as he saw how Isengar's aura was white but suddenly he saw how a red zone appeared in the area of his chest but as fast as appeared it disappeared. What was that? It had been so fast he thought his eyes had deceived him but he swore he saw something. Before he could express his doubt or understand what that had been, Isengar spoke. Although thanks to your abundant spirituality you can maintain the spiritual vision for a decent time, that does not mean that you should use it so much. Now what we will do is help you choose a switch to activate and deactivate it, Isengar spoke calmly. You can use several ways, from adjusting your hat or snapping your fingers, but the best way will always be the one you feel most comfortable with. Now I want you to enter a state of cogitation and give yourself hints about the method you chose. If you have any trouble I will guide you. Nodding, Adrian closed his eyes and taking soft breaths emptied his mind and began to imagine various spheres of light. After several tries he was finally able to adjust his switch and opened his eyes. Isengar no longer had the white aura around him. Ads by PubFuture. Okay, let's see if it works. Using the pad of his ring finger, Adrian gave 2 quick taps to the palm of his left hand, and the white aura reappeared around Isengar. It's quite comfortable and decently hidden, the redhead thought with a slight smile. I did it, teacher. It works wonderfully, Adrian said, making Isengar nod. Good, now we can start working on other things. The detective began to move towards the lamp, and when Adrian was about to turn off his spirit vision he saw the red zone appear again on Isengar's back. Opening his eyes in surprise, Adrian saw how the red zone remained on Isengar's back for a few more seconds before disappearing again. The red zone was right where the detective's heart and lungs should be, and this confused Adrian a bit. Using his ring finger, Adrian shut off his spirit vision and Isengar turned on the lamp, bringing light back into the room. Teacher, a question, are you having problems with your lungs or any pain in your heart? Adrian asked with a raised eyebrow, making Isengar look at him strangely. My student, I do smoked a lot, but you should know that I've never had any problems with my heart or my lungs, Isengar defended himself, causing Adrian to let out an awkward laugh. Forgive me that, teacher, it's just that I always see you smoke. Maybe you should lower the coal a bit, don't you think? Asked Adrian with a smile, making Isengar shake his head. Adrian, I've been smoking longer than you've been alive and I don't plan on stopping anytime soon. If you say so, Adrian replied with a shrug as Isengar just sat back on his couch. What was that red zone? I'm not a seer, so it can't be because teacher is sick. He said he was fine, but then what is it? Thought Adrian doubtfully, not knowing if he should discuss this with Isengar. After a few moments he denied this option as he sat across from the man. I'll try to find out what it means during this week. At the moment it's not dangerous, so it can wait. After Isengar taught him how to use spirit vision, the classes had continued as normal. Although it had been 2 weeks without classes, that would not mean that the detective would be soft with his teaching. It could even be said that he had been quite harsh. Teacher, I didn't think we'd start off so strong. And now, even despite being sequence 7, Adrian felt the illusion of a small headache, so now he was rubbing his forehead to make that illusion disappear. That's the price for knowledge, Adrian. You can't learn anything without a little sacrifice, and if you want to learn the necessary languages you have to suffer a little, Isengar answered calmly. Now they were both in their free time after classes. Nodding, Adrian settled more comfortably on the sofa as he spoke to the detective. Teacher, would it be possible for the Monday classes to be changed to another day? Hearing the question, Isengar didn't show any reaction, he just looked at his student. Maybe we can change the classes from Monday to Friday, although I would like to know the reason for this sudden change. I have a busy job. Mondays have been quite busy, so I don't think I'll be able to join the classes if this continues. Better change the day before I miss a class, don't you think? Adrian's tone was honest while he had a small smile. Honestly, I joined a club where they kidnap my soul to trade with others' kidnapped souls, and I really don't want us to be in the middle of a class when the kidnapper comes up with a meeting and catches me at an awkward moment. Listening to Adrian's reason, which he did not give much importance to, changing one day for another did not affect his work as a detective, so he did not care if the redhead asked for Sunday as a school day. Then it will be Friday, Isengar announced, and at that moment the servant entered the room. In his hands was a tray which had 2 teacups and a teapot together with another container with sugar. Thank you for the tea, Adrian thanked as always to the servant who always brings the tea 10 to 15 minutes after class ends. It's my pleasure, sir, the man replied with a polite smile as he placed the cups in front of Adrian and Isengar. Has no one come while I was busy? Isengar asked as the servant grabbed the teapot and began pouring. No, sir, no one has come. While the servant and the detective spoke, Adrian took advantage and touched his left palm twice with his ring finger. He reactivated the spiritual vision and the white aura reappeared around Isengar. The redhead only used a few seconds to look at Isengar, but he changed his gaze to the servant. His aura is flat, no special color or particularity. If the teacher's aura is like milk, then the servant's aura is like water. Although he could see the servant's aura, it was transparent and did not give him any sensation. This confirmed that the servant was an ordinary person. This time it's in the legs. The red zone had reappeared. This time it was around the servant's legs and they stayed there for much longer. Unlike Isengar, where the red zone only stayed for a maximum of 3 to 4 seconds, the red zone on the servant's legs stayed there for a total of 14 seconds. It keeps the same red color as Isengar's, so it's not a disease. So what is it? Enjoy your tea, sir, said the servant when he finished serving the tea. Quickly touching his palm with his ring finger, Adrian smiled softly at the man. I'll do that. Nodding to the redhead's words and with his work finished, the servant with the tray in his hands left the room, leaving the duo alone. Grasping his teacup, Isengar took a soft sip, savoring the flavor of the tea, and sighed contentedly. He always makes very good tea. What do you think, Adrian? Scooping 2 tablespoons of sugar into his cup and stirring, Adrian took a sip as well. It's a good tea, Professor, he has a good hand, praised Adrian honestly. He had never been one to drink tea. In fact, the only times he had done so throughout his previous life was in the form of tea bags, which is why when he woke up here he had just tasted real tea. And his honest opinion, it tasted like a medicine that his mother made by boiling leaves in water and he had to drink it. That medicine tasted extremely bitter. The only times he drank tea was when he ate at a restaurant. That's why he prefers to drink more coffee than tea, but the tea that Isengar's servant made always was quite good. Isengar only smiled at his student's words as he took another sip. Placing his empty cup on the table, Isengar gave Adrian a serious look. Adrian, you will have to avoid going to the East Borough. The churches have been moving around there a lot, hunting a gang. I'm not sure why, but you should avoid going if possible. That would be my fault, Professor. I reported a demon and they are now in a holy inquisition for blood. With a serious expression, Adrian replied. Thanks for the warning. Being inside a public carriage on the way to Braveheart's bar, Adrian was looking out the window deep in thought. He looked at his left hand and gave 2 quick touches to his palm with his ring finger, activating his spiritual vision. His hand and arm had a red aura that moved like fire and seemed to burn around him. After seeing this, he looked at the carriage driver's back and saw how his aura was transparent and somewhat turbulent. Nodding to this, the partial confirmation of his theory was completed. The transparent and somewhat turbulent aura should mean that the person is a normal human, while the white aura should mean that someone is from the path of the reader, and this red aura that seems to burn means that someone is from the path of the hunter. While he was thinking that, he saw how the red zone reappeared, and this time it appeared on the driver's elbows and hips. Narrowing his eyes at this, Adrian looked out the carriage window. He saw various people moving through the streets, from mothers with their children, to patrolling policemen. He then focused his gaze on the mother with her children, these people who had a transparent and somewhat turbulent aura. After a few seconds, the red zone reappeared. This time it appeared on the mother's back, on her knees and elbows. It also appeared on the top of children's heads. Then he looked at the policeman who had the same transparent and somewhat turbulent aura. After a few seconds, the red zone appeared on the taller policeman's thighs along with his left foot, and in the stomach of the shorter policeman along with his chin. Seeing this, Adrian touched his palm with his ring finger twice, shutting off his spirit vision. Looking away from the window, the redhead now had a confused expression on his face. Does that red zone reveal some kind of weak point in people? Wasn't this a Reaper Sequence 5 ability? Why then can I see it? Adrian was quite confused, putting a hand to his chin and narrowing his eyes as he tried to think of a reason for this. One of the Reaper's abilities is to detect weak points in enemies. This is not an ability that I, being Sequence 7, can use. I doubt this is a bonus from the bastard, so there must be another reason. He seriously doubted that the bastard who brought him here would have given him something good like this, so there had to be another reason. Trying to think the redhead, another similar case came to mind in which a person was able to use the abilities of a higher sequence. A Beander using the ability of a higher sequence. Klein. Klein was able to use Miracle Invoker's abilities to resurrect despite not being an angel, and this is due to the help of Saphira Castle, so shouldn't that mean I can do the same? Being the bearer of the City of Calamities, it might come with this plus. Miracle Invoker is the name of sequence 2 of the Seer pathway. All sequences to abandon their human nature and become complete mythological creatures. To refer to them, one had to use he, she, they, get the ability to perform miracles and can also use this same ability to resurrect 4 times. Thinking of that, he couldn't help but frown in annoyance and growled. Unlike Klein, I can only use the ability of sequence 5 to see people's weak points, and I can't even control it. Isn't that a big difference? Though of course none of Weather Warlock's abilities are as discreet as Resurrection, and I sure don't have the spirituality to use any of them. Ads by PubFuture. Weather Warlock is the name of sequence 2 of the Hunter's Path. There are only men in the upper sequences of the Hunter's Pathway. That's because from sequence 4 any woman who take the potion will become a man. To refer to someone that has reached sequence 2, you must use he, they, have the ability of atmokinesis. They control the frost element and can make the surrounding space burn as hot as magma. Very striking. Sighing, Adrian just looked out the window again as the carriage continued on its way. This is not so bad. The fact of seeing the weak points is very useful. This would have been a good hand to have against that faceless. But I can't even activate it at will, and it is not that precise. It only shows a general area, so I'll have to try hitting the zone until I hit the right spot. And if I use the example of Isengard with normal people, the higher the sequence of my enemies, the less time I will be able to see the weak point. Perhaps if the sequence is too high, I may not even be able to see it. Sighing, Adrian only settled further into the hard and uncomfortable seat of the carriage. At least it doesn't consume any extra spirituality, so it's kind of a balance. I can't activate it at will, but at least it doesn't charge extra. The Bravehearts bar remained the same smell of sweat and stinking armpits. The smell and the laughter of the drunks gave the bar its personality. Where are you, old man? He chanted in his mind with a mischievous smile as he turned to the bartender, who was looking at him with a resigned expression. You know what I came for, so where is he? He said mischievously as he sat on the stool, making the bartender sigh in defeat. Where he always is, the man replied dryly while cleaning a glass with a handkerchief. Thanks. With that said, he got up from his seat and headed to the poker room. Ads by PubFuture. Seeing the redhead's back walk away, the bartender just sighed as he shook his head, but while he was doing that he saw how there was a one solely note on the table. Eyes flat, he simply used a different rag and quickly wiped it across the table, making the note disappear. After that he grabbed a different glass and continued cleaning it with his rag. Good afternoon, Mr. Marich. Opening the door of the room and seeing the easily recognizable zombie, Adrian greeted warmly, making Marich just look at him, but then the man nodded and continued with his card game with his zombies. Ah, finally you say hello. Don't tell me you already fell in love with me, continued Adrian with a mischievous tone, making Marich's shoulders tremble and he held his cards more tightly. Seeing the man's reaction, the redhead just let out a soft laugh as he turned to look at the old man, who was looking at everything with a defeated expression. Brat, you really like to flirt with death, the man said as he shook his head, while Adrian only smirked as he replied. If death is a beautiful tall woman with black hair, I have no problem receiving her sweet touch. The younger's words only made the older man's eyebrow tremble strongly as he coughed. Seriously, now what do you want? Asked the exasperated old man, already wishing this weirdo would leave his bar. I would like to know if any letter has arrived in the time that I have not come to the bar. You received 3, you know what we talked about last time, for every time I receive a letter 5 solis. This was the deal that Adrian made with the elder for the fact of using it as a delivery point. Every time he received a letter in his code name he would have to pay him. I know, here you have 15 solis, the redhead replied calmly as he paid the old man. Thanks for the money, Edgar, thought the redhead with a somewhat dark smile, making the old man look at him strangely as he took a step back. The old man just reached into his vest and took out 3 letters that had a simple red seal and handed it to Adrian, who received it. Grabbing the letters, Adrian just smiled at the old man as he made his way to a free table in the room, sitting down as he stretched, he grabbed the first letter and opened it. All of this was watched by the flat faces of Marich and the old man, who only sighed and went about their respective business. Marich with his card game and the old man with his old man things. The 7th of January 1349. Mr. V. I don't know how you are at this moment, Mr. B, but I was questioned by the police all night. When I got home, the only thing I could do was sleep. It was a quiet night, but I woke up a little tired. Surely it was because of what happened yesterday. It was the most terrifying experience I have ever been through. Even before I was released, they told me the incident would be covered up as a terrorist attack. Can you believe they gave me a script on what to say in case the press asked me about what happened? I've also been rereading the script for the last few hours. If you have time, I would like you to contact me and tell me about what happened at the party. From what they asked me, it seems that you did a number. Of course, that's what Glaint is asking. Shaking his head, Adrian tucked the letter into his jacket and held out his hand for the second. Mr. B was the code name he had chosen to contact Glaint in Dutch, originally planning to use Mr. A but instead decided to go with B. For obvious reasons. The 7th of August 1349. Mr. V. Mr. B, I finally managed to collect the horn of an adult flying unicorn and the 3 grams of a royal jellyfish's venom crystal. Due to what happened at the party, the fire delayed my collection of the materials a lot, but I finally managed to get them. Now I just need the other part of the formula and I can finally be an apothecary. If you get the other part, I'm willing to pay another £150. Ads by PubFuture. Also, if you know of any reliable Beyander party, I would like you to take me to attend. I am willing to buy some material that you find interesting as payment. Who knows, maybe I'll have some good luck. Reading the last part, an interested eyebrow rose on Adrian's face, who was left thinking. It's a good deal. Teacher Isengar's party will be in a few days. Maybe I can bring Glaint. After all, it's a minor party, so there isn't much danger, and if there is, Isengar and I should be able to deal with it. Liking his plan, he already planned to write a letter to tell the Viscount about the party when he got home. Putting the letter back in his jacket, Adrian finally extended his hand to the last one. The 14th of July 1349. Mr. V. Mr. B, I hope you'll forgive me for venting a bit in the letter, but lately I've been having a little trouble sleeping. I know you've had your reasons for not writing an answer, but I hope you do one soon. I've been having dreams, no, rather nightmares with what happened at the party. I see everything as if it will happen again in front of me and I'm just a spectator, frozen and seeing everything without being able to do anything. At the beginning I see how the party goes normally, people chatting, eating or drinking, couples dance and single men try to invite the ladies. But then I see it, people coughing, as their throats swell up like frogs, as they try to use their fingernails to rip open their own necks in a desperate attempt to breathe. Then they fall, like heavy sacks, to the ground, still trying with the few remaining forces they had to breathe, but then I see her. That blonde woman standing in the middle of it all with a sweet smile on her face, as if all that was going on around her was not people drowning but as if she was in a jewelry store, choosing which necklace to buy. Then come the screams, oh goddess, the screams. Mr. B, I still think I can hear them despite being awake, and I'm not in that nightmare anymore. Because of these nightmares, I used my contacts to investigate what happened that night. Ads by PubFuture. What I found chilled me. It turns out that the women who attacked the party were helped by the police. It appears that they used some corrupt and well-connected members of the East Borough to get in. I also managed to find that several of these police officers were arrested, but others escaped and have not been located. I'm not sure if you'd be interested in this, but I hope you'll forgive me. I did some research on you and found out what happened. I am very sorry, but if it is any consolation, here I will write some of the names of the policemen who escaped. Clark Down, Yennefer Trump, Peter Jackson, Stephen Kent. The letter in Adrian's hands was crumpled from the force with which he gripped. The redhead's breathing became heavy, his red eyes flashing with fury. He tried to grab the table to calm himself down, but he used too much force and ended up breaking it. This alarmed the men, who looked in surprise at the reaction of the redhead, who was trying with everything he had to calm down, but it wasn't working. In the end, he put a hand to his face to try to calm himself down, but his anger and hatred only grew and grew, as well as an enormous guilt. He knew those names. He had memorized them upon obtaining them. They were on the list of policemen bought by the blood mark that he had given to that witch. The redhead's breathing was rough and heavy. Emotions danced in his eyes, and seeing all this, Marich got up from his seat like his zombies. He stood in front of the old man while other zombies guarded the sides. Adrian calmed down. He spoke seriously as he slowly approached the redhead, and a layer of ice slowly began to spread from his feet, moving across the floor towards the man. The zombies that were free began to slowly block Adrian's sides, closing off his escape options as they contained him. The man's reaction had been too abrupt. Due to his numerous experiences that Marich had with Beyonders, this could be considered an early symptom of losing control, and he could only have an idea of whatever that letter said caused this reaction. Due to these reasons, he decided better to act before something bigger happened. Moving his eyes to a window near Adrian, he saw how a blue-eyed blonde woman dressed in a black gothic dress appeared. Her beautiful pale face was empty of emotions, appearing to be the most beautiful of dolls that any collector would pay anything to have. Those blue eyes looked at the redhead with a bit of interest. Now this was simply to suppress the redhead. If he really lost control, he would have to count on Sharon to do some serious damage reduction. If you don't control yourself, I'll have to calm you down myself, and I won't be soft, he spoke, raising his voice, causing Adrian to take slow breaths. Realizing that he had been carried away by his emotions, he just growled as he clenched his fists. Come on, Adrian, calm down, you've been through this once. Long slow breaths, 1 2 3 1 2 3. Closing his eyes, the redhead took another long, slow breath. Each time the aggressiveness in which he breathed lessened until it became a soft, gentle breath. After another few moments, the man opened his red eyes that were now calm but still kept a mist of anger behind them. He looked at Marich with his flat face empty of emotions, then he looked down, seeing the frozen floor. Turning his head, he also saw the zombies that surrounded him. Ads by PubFuture. Finally he returned his gaze to Marich, causing the pale man to narrow his eyes alertly, and slowly he prepared himself. The zombies also slowly opened their mouths, showing their yellow and dirty teeth. The tension in the room was palpable. One could even cut it with a butter knife. Even the old man in the background was moving slowly towards the door, trying to attract as little attention as possible, but seeing the redhead staring at him made him freeze in his tracks. This made Adrian give an internal sigh. I let myself go again. Seeing what he had caused, an awkward smile formed on his face, but it almost instantly turned into a sharp one as he chuckled. Shit, Marich, if you look at me like that, I'll think you want a piece of me. Just so you know, I don't dance like that, but don't worry, I'm open-minded and I don't judge you. After all, I know I'm handsome. The tone was full of provocation and mockery as he winked coquettishly at the pale Marich, whose expression had broken. But it only took him a few moments to recover, and when he did that, his expression turned cold and he simply shot him a look before returning to his seat to continue his card game. Seeing Marich's reaction, Adrian let out another laugh before looking at the zombies surrounding him. What's up, guys? Do you want a piece too? The zombies watching him did the same and went back to their activities, looking somewhat disappointed that they couldn't eat anything. Sharon, who was watching this drama from the window, interested, seeing that it was all over, she just closed her eyes and disappeared from the window. Seeing that things calmed down, Adrian stopped laughing to just maintain a fake smile as he looked at the crumpled letter again before putting it away in his leather jacket. With that done, he headed for the exit of the room, but on the way he ran into the still tense old man. Ads by PubFuture. Looking at the man who was looking at him with a well-concealed discomfort in his eyes, sighing internally, Adrian maintained his fake smile as he took a 5 solis note from his pocket and placed it in the pocket of the old man's shirt. Sorry for the trouble, the redhead apologized as he patted the shoulder of the old man, who could barely hide his discomfort. Already having enough with bothering the poor man, Adrian left the room. When the old man internally counted 5 minutes and being sure that the redhead left, he sighed, finally visibly relaxing. I'm too old for this shit. Marich, listening to the man's words, just nodded internally as he shuffled his deck again. Being outside the bar and hiding in a dark alley, Adrian took all the letters out of his jacket again and read them again, but this time he decided to pay more attention to each one. The first ones were normal within the ordinary, but in the third he noticed a problem that he had not paid much attention to. A noble, due to heavy upbringing in all kinds of fields, always had a perfect handwriting, especially those of a high position, and even more so in the case of Glaint, who took the mantle of Viscount being quite young and with a very heavy load on his shoulders. But the handwriting of the letter, despite being superior to the redhead's own, lacked the perfection of the previous ones, something that should not even be sent if the final point was thicker than it should. If an error was noticed in a letter from someone of such a level, it was burned and rewritten, even more so taking into account the man's personality. Glaint is quite emotionally and mentally disturbed. Compared to his first two letters, several words seem slurred and his A's and L's are shaky. He needs a psychologist. Analyzing and diagnosing the Viscount, he already planned to send him a letter about this, but first he reread the names of the escaped policemen. He also saw that there was a short description but with decent information about each one along with photos of them, something he hadn't seen when he first read it due to the shock he got. After reading everything again, he just closed his eyes as he put the letters back into his jacket. Ads by PubFuture. What am I supposed to do with this information now? If the churches haven't been able to find these guys with the resources they have, how can I? Quote. He. Quote. He. These were valid reasons, but this did nothing to appease the hatred in his heart, so he just let out an empty laugh as he raised a hand to his face. Who am I kidding? I'm going to find them and I'm going to make them sing about everything they know about those neutered bitches. After laughing for a long time, Adrian calmed down and began to think more coldly about what to do with the information he had. One of the reasons why the churches haven't found these cops, and supposing they haven't, should be because those who they did catch sang like little birds in the morning, so the fugitives are no longer a priority. After all, they are much more busy with the issue of annihilating the Black Skull. They are a more dangerous threat than some corrupt cops. So if I were a dirty cop, I'm on the run, but there are no posters with my face and no bounty on my head. Where would I go? The information Glaint had managed to get included a bit of each other's personalities. They were all quite similar in the fact that they were treacherous, lacking in morals, and would do anything for money, but there was one crucial detail that they all shared and was the strongest one. Ads by PubFuture. They are huge cowards, so they wouldn't try to leave Backland for fear of being caught, nor would they stay in any decent part of the city. Using his right hand to scratch his chin, he already had an idea and couldn't help but growl in annoyance. The best option would be exactly East Borough. The police have no power there and the power of the churches is greatly reduced. They would be practically ghosts. They could join any gang to get money and nobody would care. What better place for a rat than to hide in the sewer? But this is a big problem. I can't go there to collect information as Adrian nor Mr. Holmes. That would be serving me on a silver platter with a juicy red apple in my mouth ready to be devoured by whichever of the three churches manages to catch me. His mind turned several times on what to do, but it didn't take long for an idea to come to his head, and this made him smile dangerously. If neither Adrian nor Mr. Holmes can go, then let's leave the job of gathering information to Batwoman. Zio has a large number of contacts, so it shouldn't be too difficult for her to move some of them around the East Borough to find these wretches, and I have several ways to pay her. Paying Zio would not be a problem. After all, he had the Trickmaster formula and a part of the Sheriff formula. Today in a few hours is our meeting, so I can talk about this with her. The week that Zio had requested was over and they would have to meet again today. Perhaps it would be the last time, considering that Joseph is still alive, but Zio has no chance against him, and he had already been reported to the churches, so his days were numbered. I may have already joined the Tarot Club and it's no longer necessary to maintain contact with her, but the channels she has would take a long time to create, time I don't have, so I'd better try to think of a way to keep this relationship alive. Thinking about that last part, the redhead couldn't help but let out an funny laugh as he tried to cover his mouth with his hand. I already sound like a little kid trying to keep his parents' toxic marriage alive. Adrian whispered with another laugh. Ads by PubFuture. Leaving that episode behind, he left the alley in the direction of his house. First I write the letter to Glaint about the party and then I prepared myself for marriage therapy. It was already 6 p.m. and around this time was when the sunset fell, painting everything a beautiful orange. Adrian was already behind the bar waiting for Zio's visit. He was wearing a black leather jacket, which was another one that he had modified so that it had many more pockets inside where he had various tools, tripwires, first aid kits, etc. This jacket also concealed the revolver under his left armpit. He also wore black hunting pants as well as his hunting boots and black gloves. To crown his appearance was his short black windbreaker that barely exceeded his shoulders, with the hood raised, and with his faithful mask. The best way to describe the windbreaker would be the short cloak that the hunters in Yarnum wear to wipe off the blood of the beasts they hunted in the nightmare. And this was the main reason why Adrian hadn't gotten a new one, other than that it was much more comfortable to move like this. Zio shouldn't take too long, but if that's the case I'll just wait until 2000 because I don't have anything else to do, to be honest, and I don't want to be bored at home. The redhead thought as he leaned against the wall and began to wait. After 20 minutes he heard light footsteps heading towards him, and turning in the direction of them he saw the figure of the miss heading towards him from the bottom of the alley. "Good evening, miss," he said in Mr. Holmes's tone as Zio came up to his side. Looking up, Zio still had the costume she had used when she hid her identity, but with the hood down. This allowed him to see that she no longer had her makeup on. "Good evening, Mr. Holmes." Zio's tone, despite being well hidden, Adrian managed to notice the sadness behind it, and this made him sigh. "How are you doing?" Hearing the masked man's words, Zio couldn't help but sigh as she leaned against the opposite wall with her eyes on the ground. "I don't know why you care about this, Mr. Holmes," she spoke in a calm tone as she took out her triangular sword and looked at her reflection in it. "It's been bad, huh?" Ignoring the question, Adrian spoke, but Mr. Holmes's usual tone was now a little softer. Raising her emerald gaze to the man, she observed that he was calmly observing the orange sky. Looking down at her triangular sword again, she just sighed as she nodded. "Her mother is devastated. When I told her about Coin's death she just shut down. She hasn't eaten for several days and I can hardly get her to drink anything," Zio replied in a heavy tone. The last few days had left her unable to rest and she had barely been able to sleep. "You didn't tell her how?" "No." Zio cut off the man's question, but she already knew what he was going to ask. "I don't want to imagine how she would react if she knew how it happened." When she asked, in one of the few moments that she spoke, how she had died, "I could only say that it was quick and painless, that Coin had not suffered." Zio's voice broke at the end and she had to take a moment to regain her composure. Adrian just kept watching the sky, giving the woman time to calm down, and after a few moments Zio took a breath and continued talking. "I'm not sure if she believed me, but so far she hasn't asked me where her body is. I don't know what I'm supposed to say when that happens." Ads by PubFuture. Averting his gaze from the sky, he looked at Zio, who kept looking at her sword, but her hands were trembling and her eyes were slightly red. "You can tell her that the recovery of the body was impossible. The only thing you could do was find out what had happened and that you had to escape." Adrian spoke in a somewhat cold tone and Zio gave him a strong look. "How could I do that to her?" Zio muttered with barely contained anger. "But you already hid the truth from her once," Adrian cut coldly, causing Zio to bite her tongue to shut up and start to tremble in anger. "Or are you planning to tell her that her daughter's body was blown to pieces? That the truth is that her beloved daughter died in a basement at the hands of a pedophile?" Adrian raised his voice, making Zio tremble harder, and she clenched her fists so hard that blood began to drip. Sighing, Adrian just moved away from the wall and stood next to the woman, leaning against the wall. The masked redhead looked at the woman and spoke, still with a cold tone. "I know you want to bury that sword of yours in my neck and twist it because of what I said, but you also know I'm right. The way Coin died was horrible and any mother would be horrified that her child died like that. You know that woman better than I do, so if you didn't tell her how it happened then you know very well what she can do to herself." Quote. Zio didn't say anything, but she had lowered her arms and her gaze had fallen to the floor of the alley. "For her mental stability, you will have to hide the truth until the end of your days." Adrian finished speaking. Zio said nothing. She remained silent, still looking at the ground, and the alley returned to its silence. Only the sound of the carriages being dragged by the horses and the footsteps of the people outside the alley could be heard. After a while of silence, and seeing that Zio did not move from her place nor speak, Adrian sighed and spoke again, but this time in a much softer tone. "I'm sure you did it with the best intentions for her. You did everything you could for her. You don't have to blame yourself for what happened," Adrian consoled Zio, who remained silent. Ads by PubFuture. "The pain you feel now is one you shouldn't be ashamed to feel. You are grieving too." Adrian continued, and when he finished speaking Zio raised her head and looked at him. Her eyes were red and tired, but there were no tears. "Will the guilt ever go away?" Zio finally spoke and asked in a weak voice to Adrian, who only had a weak smile behind his mask. "No, it will always be there and you will have to live with it, but at least I can tell you that it gets easier with time," Adrian replied as he looked at the sky. Zio also did the same, looking up at the orange sky that was already getting dark. After a few moments she closed her eyes. The memories that had been torturing her all the previous nights reappeared, but this time she didn't repress them but rather let them come despite how much it hurt her. She saw when she first met Coin, how her mother tried to hit her with the broom for thinking that she had hurt her, how the girl asked her for help with her homework, the lunches she shared with the small family, how she went to their house and how her mother begged her to find her. As she spent several days and nights looking for her to the point that Furs begged her to rest, she saw how she entered the house and finally found her. The good and bad memories. Finally, after a long time, she opened her eyes and looked at the almost dark sky of Backland. She cried a little, but she felt a little less heavy. Turning to look at the masked man next to her, she just gave him a weak smile. She didn't know why she had told all this to the man who she didn't even know his face, but maybe the fact that he had saved her life motivated her, also maybe it was because she needed a different approach. Furs wasn't very good at comforting people. I needed that, Mr. Holmes. She was truly grateful, and Adrian smiled under his mask. Whenever you want, miss, he replied, returning to Mr. Holmes's original tone. Seeing that Zio was somewhat better, Adrian couldn't help but internally sigh with relief. With all that solved, now came the part that would be somewhat uncomfortable, but he didn't cared. Even though I enjoyed being your psychiatrist, miss, I actually came to ask for your help with something. Adrian said, making the smile that Zio had on her face crack, and she looked at him uncomfortably. Sorry about that, Mr. Holmes, the woman apologized as she quickly put away her sword, and by doing so she already had a serious expression. What do you need? What a lady. How quickly you are back in business. Leaving that aside, I need your help in finding 4 bastards. Zio was annoyed by the man's words, but she already knew his personality, so she just let it go. Apparently it seems that they did something to annoy him, thought Zio. She managed to detect the annoyance in the man's voice. This is obvious because Adrian wasn't trying to cover it up. What would my pay be? Zio asked seriously. She could take this job, but first she needed a price. Perfect. Don't do anything without knowing what you get in return, thought the redhead, nodding to the woman's attitude. It varies a lot, from pounds to potion formulas, whatever suits you best, but it also depends on your performance, Adrian said unhurriedly, surprising Zio. Frowning in thought, Zio was silent for a few moments before asking seriously. How many pounds, in which potion formulas? In pounds they are 35, and if we are talking about potion formulas, I am only willing to use them if you have a very good performance, in the sense that you give me where they live, their work hours, what they eat, and what hand they use to wipe their ass. First there is the incomplete formula of sequence 8 of the arbiter pathway. I will only give it to you as payment for the fact that it is incomplete, otherwise you would have to pay. Then there is the complete formula of sequence 8 of the apprentice pathway, but this one I am only willing to give you a 10% discount, Adrian said seriously, but Zio widened her eyes upon hearing the formulas he had. The formula that Furs needs. Turns out Mr. Holmes had it all this time. The woman thought in alarm, and she spoke hurriedly as she tried to contain her anxiety. Mr. Holmes, if I want the formula of sequence 8 of the apprentice pathway right now, how much would I have to pay? It wasn't that she had ignored the fact that the man also had her formula even though it was incomplete, it was that Furs needed hers much more. My formula can wait, Furs is the priority. That would be 400 pounds if you want it right now, Adrian said unhurriedly. So with the discount it's 360 pounds. She did a quick calculation in her head and couldn't help but bite the inner of her cheek. She and Furs had a lot of money saved, but half of it would be spent on the formula and they still had to buy the main and complementary ingredients. Every pound counts, and even if it's only 40 pounds it will be very useful. Sighing, she looked into the eyes of the man's mask and spoke. How much information do you have on these 4 people? I'll assume this is your way of accepting the job. Adrian asked, and seeing that Zio nodded he gave a short laugh. Smiling under his mask, Adrian took out from his black jacket a piece of paper that contains everything Glaint got from the 4 unfortunates, including their photos. There are 4 corrupt police officers. I need you to find their location and deliver it to me. It is very likely that they are hiding in East Borough. It is very unlikely but not impossible that they may have hidden elsewhere, but I doubt it. He spoke while Zio grabbed the paper and began to read everything. Reading and seeing the short profiles of her targets, she just nodded as she put the paper in her pocket. It will take a while, but the information will be delivered to you in a maximum of 5 weeks. The East Borough is very big and there are too many gangs. My men will have to move carefully and they will surely ask me for extra pay. Zio spoke in a business tone, but Adrian managed to read between the lines and understanding the message. He just let out an amused laugh. Then I'll add the £35 to your pay and the discount will be up to 13%, but remember you'll only get the discount if you get everything on them, Adrian said, amused, making Zio nod, but inwardly she was happy that she achieved her goal, but she realized of a problem. Then how will I send you the information, Mr. Holmes? She asked doubtfully. It's quite simple, write a letter with any update and put it in an envelope sealed with a red seal and deliver it at Braveheart's bar to a man called the Old Man. Ask the bartender about him and just deliver the letter to him and tell him it's in the name from Mr. B, Adrian said calmly, and Zio listened and repeated the method in her head until she was sure she memorized it. Adrian just smiled under his mask. This was the method he had told Glaint and Dutch to communicate with him, and now he would take advantage and use the same method with Zio. Why bother and create a new one if you already have one that already works fine? The redhead thought, amused, and he added one last thing. Also, if you find any kind of danger or serious problem, I will be here every Tuesday and Thursday from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. in case you need help. Hearing the danger part, Zio narrowed her eyes suspiciously at the man in front of her, causing Adrian to chuckle softly. Don't worry, miss, as long as you and your men are careful, you'll be fine. I would never give you a job you can't handle. Although Zio had the beginning of confidence in the man in front of her, she would not endanger her men by entering unknown territory. What kind of dangers? Nothing that can't be controlled. The 4 policemen are normal people, but you should avoid attracting too much attention in the East Borough. You know things are tense there, Adrian informed calmly, and Zio nodded. I'll keep it in mind. You'll be informed of any progress every 3 to 6 days, Zio said seriously. Adrian said nothing. He just nodded, accepting the time said by the woman. At the same time, he put his hand in his pocket and took out his wallet, and in front of Zio he opened it, and counting £15 he extended it to her. How much money does this guy have? There was at least £200 there, Zio thought a little enviously as she saw the money inside the wallet. She didn't ask the reason for this because it wasn't necessary and just took the money and put it away. In the bounty hunting field, it is almost an obligation to make an initial payment for the expenses that a bounty hunter has to make during the duration of the job. Whether informants, food, ammunition, etc. She was used to this by now, so she simply accepted the money and then looked at the man. Have a good night, Mr. Holmes. You too, miss. With the simple farewell, Zio left the alley the same way she arrived, while Adrian stayed where he was, looking at the dark sky of Backland. He put his hand in a pocket of his jacket and took out Hangover Time. Opening the watch and seeing that it marked 8, he just nodded, closing the watch and left the alley. In the house that the aforementioned Adrian came out of the shadows of the room while taking off his mask. Now all I have to do is wait, the redhead thought with a sigh. He pulled out a metal bottle from his jacket and took a long sip. Today has been a complicated day, the redhead whispered into the air, who sat on the sofa while he took off his boots with his feet and then put them on the table. Raising a gloved hand to his face, the redhead scratched his forehead as he looked up at the ceiling of his living room. I joined the tarot club. It turns out that there is more to Adrian than I thought. I finally learned how to use spiritual vision, which includes the weak point, and finally the revelation of the policeman. I hate Mondays. Adrian spoke to the air. He was mentally exhausted. Getting up from the sofa, he grabbed his boots and headed to the bathroom. Appearing in the city of calamities and looking around, Adrian overscanned the entire city. The buildings remained the same, the soldiers were patrolling as always, and when they detected that he had arrived, they gave a military salute and then continued with their business. Ads by PubFuture. There are no changes, the soldiers look normal, my connection remains the same. After analyzing the city and its population, he lowered his gaze to his body. His body was normal, he had entered without a shirt and he could see his muscular torso, his skin looked healthy, there were no traces of the cracks that he had seen in the tarot club. Apparently my soul is normal here. That doesn't make sense. If the principle that my soul is the same that enters here in Saphira Castle, then what is the difference that makes it look so damaged? Besides, where is the black robe? He did not have it on when he entered. He remembers that even if he had it on he would not feel it, that is why he looked at his whole body, but the strange robe was nowhere to be found. Is it banned from entering the city? Does this robe consider the city of calamities a no-no place? Adrian whispered doubtfully before an idea struck him. My soul is normal while I'm in here, so the robe doesn't find it necessary to go in to keep it together. The redhead said in astonishment before a shiver went up his spine just as another possible fact came to his mind. Wouldn't determining that whiting the city of calamities is safe and whiting the Saphira castle is not make that robe a sentient being? When he threw that question into the air, he knew that no one would answer his question, only after doing that he couldn't help but laugh ironically. I have a fairy on my shoulder, or in this case a mute fairy uniting my soul. If it is seriously aware, up to now it has not done me any harm but has protected me against the divinations of the churches. As long as it didn't harm him or prove to be a danger to him, Adrian was willing to tolerate it. After all, until now the robe had proven to be a kind of silent helper. When he thought that, an idea came to his mind and he couldn't help but laugh out loud at it. If Klein has the mirror arrows, then I have this black robe. When saying the last thing, the redhead frowned while putting a hand to his chin. As long as it keeps helping me, maybe it's not a bad idea to name it. After all, Black Robe is not a good name. But what kind of name would a robe like? The robe is loose-fitting, it's quite similar to the ones used in the Harry Potter live action. The robe was quite similar to the one worn by the students of the Hogwarts school from the famous book Harry Potter. Maybe a name that has a connection to that book wouldn't be bad, the redhead thought as he put his hand to his chin and thought deeply. My robe's abilities, if I see it in a certain way, is similar to the in the fact that they both hide the wearer, but that name doesn't seem to fit mine. The is one of the three Deathly Hallows. Deathly Hallows. Hallows. Adrian muttered as an idea hit him and he just smiled sharply. What better name for my robe than Hunter's Hallow? Adrian said, amused as he let out a soft laugh. This robe was an item with extremely useful abilities. It would be an injustice if it didn't have a heavy name, and he thinks that Hunter's Hallow is perfect for it. Oversimplifying, according to the legend of the book, is part of a trio of objects that were created by Death for three brothers. These objects of enormous power were called Death Hallows. The robe, if it really was created by the bastard who brought him here, and this bastard was the top of the Hunter pathway, then it was worthy that the robe to be baptized. With that done, the redhead said calmly as he extended his hand towards a floating flame, and after sending spirituality it grew until it formed a door of flames. Behind that door he could see himself kneeling, and in front of him, well bent, was his Mr. Holmes' clothes. Opening his eyes in his bathroom and seeing that nothing had been forgotten, Adrian nodded and grabbed a change of clothes that was hanging on the side. Ads by PubFuture. Putting on a simple shirt and pants, he left the bathroom and went to his room while yawning. I won't get up until 9 o'clock, the man said sleepily while scratching his eye. Entering his room, Adrian sat on his bed. In his hand was Hangover Time, which he placed on the nightstand next to the origami. He grabbed a container that was on the nightstand, pulling the burnt band out of his pocket. Adrian placed it inside and sealing the container with a wall of spirituality, he placed it under his bed. He also took out his metal bottle and placed it next to the pocket watch. With that done, he covered himself with his blanket, and after a hard day he finally slept. He opened his eyes a little confused. Looking around, Adrian saw that he was in a walled courtyard. The house was a little further back. He also saw that there was a long table in the middle of it. The table had a tablecloth with details of snowmen, red ribbons and little bells. On top of this table was a large amount of food consisting of Russian salad, creamed potato, baked meat, grilled chicken, etc. This is, Adrian said in astonishment, finding it hard to believe what he was seeing. Before he could do anything, he heard footsteps coming from the house, and looking towards the door he saw a large group of people coming out. Leading the group was a couple, a man and woman who appeared to be in their 40s. The woman looked quite good for her age. She was about 1.63 meters tall, with naturally tanned skin, dark brown eyes, and dyed dark brown hair, although slightly overweight. The man was of average height, barely 1.70 meters, he had gray hair and looked like he was almost completely bald. He had a beer belly like most dads. Mom, Dad, Adrian whispered longingly. He quickly walked towards them, and when he extended his hand to touch them, but it passed through them as if they were an illusion. Ads by PubFuture. When this happened, he could only lower his head while chuckling in defeat. Right, this is just a memory, the redhead said painfully as he raised his head again and looked at the rest of the group who were sitting at the table. He saw himself, That is, his body is Joa and sitting in front of him was Cruyff. Adrian looked at his brother who was unaware of his presence and he was helping himself to several portions of food on his plate. Cruyff never liked vegetables so he only served baked meat and grilled chicken. This made him just let out a sad laugh while his eyes watered and he scratched them with his hand. He didn't want to miss anything so he was holding back the tears. Next to Cruyff was a man who was in his late 30s. He had a bald spot in the middle of his black hair. He was someone 1.75 meters tall and from what his shirt showed from his chest, he was quite hairy. Nice to see you again, Bigfoot. There was a lot of sadness in his tone but Adrian tried to say it as provocative as he could as he had always insulted his uncle. Obviously his uncle was also unaware of his presence and he just opened a can of Budweiser and took a long sip. Hugo put down the gasoline. We haven't prayed yet, joked the woman sitting next to her uncle. This was a woman who was in her mid-30s with dyed blonde hair and brown eyes. She was his uncle's girlfriend, Jasmine. They had been dating for about 3 years and their wedding was supposed to be in February of the following year. Hugo, please. This time it was his mom who spoke and his uncle just gave an awkward laugh as he lowered the can. Sorry, Rocchio. Always at the worst moments, his body said with false disappointment and his uncle only gave him a look while Cruyff let put a small laugh. Enough. Joa, Hugo, stop your game. This time it was his dad who spoke and Joa just nodded and then he bowed his head while clasping his hands in front of him. All the others did the same. Seeing that calm returned to the table and that everyone was already in a position to pray, his father nodded and lowering his head with his eyes closed, he began to pray. Thank God for another day of life that you give us. Thank you for making it possible for all of us to meet at this Christmas dinner. There are people who could not attend and we ask you to please take care of them. Watching his family pray with a sad look, Adrian bit his lip to calm himself. It was a beautiful night on the 24th, the wind was not strong but it was refreshing. This made the 30 degrees of heat that it was at night not feel so annoying and uncomfortable. Tonight was something special but in a bad way. His cousins had traveled to visit his father's side of the family so they couldn't attend. Only his family and his uncles were here. It's been a while since I had a dream from the past, he thought with slightly misty eyes as he watched his family pray. He could smell the food, he could even taste it in the air, it was like he was there again. Amen, he heard his father say and the rest repeated the same. As soon as that happened he saw how each member started to eat. Cruyff always loved roast chicken so that was what he started eating first. Cruyff, pass me the Russian salad. Hearing that, Adrian couldn't help but let out a soft laugh. The Russian salad was a salad that he didn't usually eat much but that was only because he preferred to eat it at parties. It was one of his favorite salads but it was also kind of heavy so you had to be careful not to fill yourself up with it. And that happened right at the party. The redhead thought wryly as he shook his head. Watching his family eat, Adrian just smiled sadly and looked up at the sky. At the top of it hung on the black sky was a beautiful silver moon illuminating everything with its white light. This white moon, unlike the crimson moon, feels clean, pure, even holy. While he thought that and looked at the moon, he heard someone cough but it was clear that it was false. Turning around he saw how his father had his fist in his mouth. His father, seeing that he had caught everyone's attention, just smiled showing his teeth and spoke with emotion. I would like to tell you about a surprise that Rocchio and I prepared, he said affectionately as he grabbed his mother's hand and squeezed it. His mother smiled warmly at his father and then turned to look at the group who were looking at this in confusion. Mom, Dad, what did you prepare? Cruyff asked as he lowered the chicken bone and wiped the sauce from his mouth with a napkin. Joa saw his brother and he had to cover his mouth to avoid laughing. Even Adrian saw this and couldn't help but let out a loud laugh. Cruyff never learned to eat any type of chicken well, be it fried or grilled. As long as the chicken had bones in it, he would always make a mess when eating. His father smiled at his brother and looking at his mother who smiled the same and nodded. With the permission given his father raised his voice. We have reserved a place in a good restaurant for the New Year's party and I would like Hugo and Jasmine to be able to attend. This is more for you after all, your wedding is very close, his mom finished as she drank some wine from her glass. His uncle and aunt-to-be were surprised by this and didn't know what to say. Man, at least shut your mouth, you don't want to swallow a fly, Joa said as he shook his head and drank some Fanta. I don't know what to say, Albert, his uncle said, still a bit stunned. and his dad just shook his head while taking a drink of Budweiser. Just make sure you wear a good suit, the man replied with amusement as he raised his beer towards his uncle. His uncle just smiled at his father as he raised his beer towards him and spoke with a sharp smile. Always full of surprises Albert, he could feel the gratitude his uncle was trying to express and he just smiled softly at this. His uncle always had a hard time expressing himself. What was hardest for him was being thankful and he often didn't know how to react when someone did something nice for him. His way of showing affection was always teasing. You'd think it would be hard for him to make friends with that articulateness, but it turns out he was something of a celebrity at his job. The life of the parties, you could say. Make sure the suit isn't ripped in the rear again, Joa said as he winked at his uncle. Ha ha ha, the man laughed with obvious sarcasm, making the rest of the family laugh the same with Adrian. Hugo once during a co-worker's party he had attended with a suit that had a hole in the rear, and he had just decided to wear white underwear, making the problem too obvious. It took him half an hour to discover why everyone were laughing. Jasmine was his coworker when that happened and that's how they started dating because she, feeling bad for laughing, brought him homemade cookies the next day to apologize. Can we put that aside and enjoy the delicious food in front of us? His uncle spoke wisely, this was simply to divert attention from himself. He's right. Let's eat everything and then we can continue bothering Hugo, his mother said with a small smile as she ate some baked meat. This made the facet that Hugo tried to maintain break and he only looked at his mother with treason. What a good sister, the man said sarcastically, but he had a small smile on his face that he tried to hide. I love you too, his mom replied calmly with a sweet smile on her face. After this, dinner continued normally and Adrian watched this with sadness and longing in his eyes. This was the last thing he did before going home and sleeping, then he woke up in that cave. Opening his eyes, Adrian looked around his room, his eyes were slightly cloudy and red, there was also a deep sadness in them, he seemed to be looking at nothing. He recognized his simple wardrobe at the back of the dark room, his mirror on one side and the most recognizable being the soft crimson light that came from his window. Looking at his window, he looked up and saw how in the black cloudy sky, looming between the clouds in a sensual and dark way like a beautiful lady who dropped the towel after a shower in front of her lover, there was a crimson moon illuminating everything with its crimson light. Recognizing that he was back in the real world, he tried to smile but his smile looked like it was broken, so he just hung his head as he sighed with sadness and disappointment. Here again, the redhead murmured weakly. Taking a hand to his cheek, and feeling that they were wet, he just closed his eyes. It seems that he cried while he was sleeping. But that only took a moment since he then opened his eyes. They were still slightly cloudy but the sadness that was in them disappeared, being replaced by an enormous hatred and fury that, thanks to the fact that they reflected the light of the crimson moon, seemed to shine, giving him a nightmarish appearance. Why do I have these dreams? It's been over a month since I had them, why today again? Is this the bastard's dark way of motivating me to speed through the sequences and hasten his resurrection? The redhead thought furiously as he clenched his fists tightly and his brows deeply furrowed, but immediately after he closed his eyes again and began to take short inhalations and long exhalations. He repeated this until his brows and fists relaxed. Opening his eyes, they were no longer cloudy but there was still a fury behind them like a raging sea. If you think I'll fall for that game, you can go fuck yourself, the redhead said through his teeth, his tone dripping with such venom that would make even an adult cry in fear. He had never had the idea of returning home, although that would be his greatest wish, but he knew that when he woke up here that possibility died. His fate was already tied to this world and he couldn't leave it. He now had few options: ascend to the top or have the bastard revive in his body. They were already horrible options: be forever on the verge of eternal madness or his body being used by the bastard, killing him in the process. And that's not counting becoming the new pot for the soup or being consumed by Medusa. He no longer believed that he would be able to sleep again. I need some coffee. Sighing heavily, Adrian sat on his bed, putting on his boots and grabbing hangover time, he stuffed it into his pocket and the metal bottle in his back pocket. Ads by PubFuture. Then he knelt down and grabbed the container where he kept the burnt band. Releasing the wall of spirituality, he put the black band in his other pocket. He went to his wardrobe and opening it, he took out his brown leather jacket and put it on. Grabbing the door handle and about to open it, he stopped. Quote. Turning his gaze to his nightstand, he saw the origami bird made by his snake investor. Sighing, Adrian went to his nightstand and grabbing the origami he placed it in a pocket of his jacket. The best thing would be to have this with me all the time, I don't want to lose it, although it would be good if the origami gave me luck, but that's impossible, thought the redhead as he shook his head. When Klein, acting as the crazy hunter German Sparrow, received luck for completing the job of protecting Darkwill, he went to test it in a casino and ended up discovering that thanks to Saphira Castle's aura, he could not receive luck because the aura would prevent this. Adrian assumes that his case is the same. With the origami secured, he left his room and went to his kitchen and made himself a cup of black coffee. Sitting at his table and with the cup in one hand, Adrian just looked at the hot black liquid in it. Raising the cup and taking a sip of the bitter liquid, he just slightly closed his eyes. Now he didn't want something sweet, so he decided not to put sugar in the coffee. Setting the half-empty cup down to the table, Adrian just looked around his dining room, if he could call it that. There was only a medium wooden table with 3 chairs, one being used by him and the other 2 empty at his sides. This was not like the memory he saw today, how his family was eating Christmas dinner at a big table full of food, joking and talking about the future. Thinking this, Adrian just let out a sad smile as he brought the cup to his lips. I wonder how they are now. I don't know if the time in this dimension is the same as mine, but I just hope they're fine, the redhead thought with a sad smile as he lowered the now empty cup. Getting up from his chair and taking the cup to the kitchen, he just placed it in the sink and filled it with water. He was going to wash it later. Going to his room again, Adrian went to his wardrobe and opening the hidden place that he had created, he took out a brown cloak. Putting on his cloak and pulling up the hood to cover his red hair, he just opened his bedroom window and jumped out. Moving through the dark and empty streets of Backland was the cloaked figure of Adrian. He moved like a panther in the night with silent steps and seemed to be part of the shadows, not being seen by the policemen who patrolled the streets with kerosene lamps in hand. Thanks to his numerous outings at night, Adrian had memorized the routes of these policemen and he knew where to move to avoid being seen. He had mastered this to such an extent that he had even passed within 3 meters of them several times and they never noticed. This had allowed him to know a little about the history of several of the policemen. For example, there was one named Max whose wife had been unfaithful to him with his coworker. And now he just passed behind the aforementioned without him noticing, and the redhead quickly entered an alley, leaving the streets. Adrian had a small smile on his face during this entire trip. He could have easily used the rooftops and alleys to move, but he preferred to use the policemen as practice to move. Now it's only 2 blocks away. Adrian thought calmly as he ran towards a wall. Stomping on the wall, he used this as momentum to reach a pipe that was quite high. Holding on to this pipe, he swung to another. This pipe continued to the ceiling, so Adrian used it to climb up. He did all this in silence, no strange sounds leaving the alley. Being on the roof, Adrian still kept his little smile as he began to run across the roofs and jumped whenever he needed to. Every time he jumped from one building to another, the smile he had would grow a little bigger until it was finally a huge one. He had no reason to have gone out at night, but he just did. He needed to move to ease his mind, and every time he went out like this he felt good. And feeling good was something he needed now. Stopping on a roof, Adrian took a deep breath. He had been moving at full speed for almost an hour, thanks to being sequence 7 of a path that increases the physique. He was not without air. It was also due to his large lungs. This could be considered a training that worked to calm the redhead's mind. Looking up, the redhead simply looked at the red moon in the sky. He had discovered this roof a long time ago. The view of the moon from here was beautiful. The moon was in the middle of dark clouds, and thanks to how it illuminated the clouds, it seemed that it was surrounded by dark red clouds. Adrian watched all this with a critical eye, and after a few moments he smirked. The white moon is still more beautiful, whore, Adrian thought provocatively as he looked at the crimson moon. Friday afternoons at Backland Bridge were always lively. Whether it's families going to visit their loved ones at St. Eston's Hospital, drunks going to Lucky Bar to drink, they didn't care that it was only 4:30 p.m. They even drank at 7 a.m. or they also visited Braveheart's bar to get drunk or hidden from the eyes of the police, buy things on the black market. There was also the Harvest Church, but it had barely any members and people coming in, plural, members, because recently a rather tall woman had joined and was under the mantle of the father of the church. There was a small rumor that she had been seen fighting in the tournament organized by Braveheart's Bar, but it has never been confirmed due to the fact that this fighter wears a mask that covers her entire head. The very few people who attend the church say that she is too sweet to participate in such a bloody act. The biggest voice for this is a woman who recently moved here and has been attending church every day, being the only person to do that. All this information was being reviewed in the mind of a man with his head slightly hanging who moved among the large group of workers having a bag hanging on his arm, but he always had the bag close to his body, almost embracing it. According to Mr. Adrian's words, here it is not uncommon for your pockets or bags to be stolen when you are more distracted. The man thought alertly as he hugged the bag with his right arm and with his other arm tried to keep the simple hat he had on place. He also tried to get the hat to cover his face, which was stained with coal, although it seemed that he did it to himself, but since all the people were busy with their own problems, they did not give importance to this. It was also because of the clothes that the man was wearing. He had ash yellow hair along with somewhat thin eyebrows and a rather delicate face. That face was hidden by the charcoal that stained it, and also if one looked very closely he seemed to have used makeup on the corners of his eyes and nose to make them appear deeper, making them look older than he really was. He was wearing a somewhat worn worker's clothing, but it still did not have the very worn appearance that the other workers had, but it was enough to go unnoticed. This man was the Viscount Glaint, who had come to Backland Bridge to meet with Adrian so that he could attend a Beander party. A true Beander party, not like the parties he had with his friends. This was the real thing. These kinds of thoughts were going through Glaint's head, who could barely contain himself from letting out a cry of excitement, but he did have a weird smile on his face. Maybe I can finally get the apothecary potion formula, thought Glaint with great excitement, unconsciously quickening his pace. Looking around the street without looking up too much, he saw Street Eston's hospital and nodded. Mr. Adrian said we would meet near this hospital, so where is he? He thought as he looked around trying to find the man's distinctive red hair. But no matter how much he looked, he couldn't find the man's shadow, which made Glaint worry and his brows frown in confusion. This is supposed to be Street Eston's hospital, right? So where is Mr. Adrian? Did he lie to me? The man thought, somewhat alarmed as he moved his head faster trying to find the redhead. You look like an owl the way you turn your neck. An amused voice sounded next to him, surprising him, and he jumped in fright. What? Turning his head to his side was someone who had not been there before, a tall man with his head slightly bowed, dressed in a very worn worker's outfit with a face full of coal and a simple hat. The surprise affected Glaint for a long time, and this caused the man to let out an amused laugh. What's wrong, Quico? Don't you recognize me? The man spoke, amused as he raised his head, letting Glaint see his bright red eyes. Mr. Adrian, thought Glaint excitedly as a big smile spread across his face. In the letters Mr. Adrian had written to him, he had said that when they met they would not use their real names until they were safe. So Mr. Adrian chose the names, and he couldn't help but feel that they had some power. The power of names with weight. He would use Quico. And Mr. Adrian would use Chavo. Where were you? I thought you had lied to me, Glaint said emotionally to Adrian, who laughed and approached him and whispered in his ear. I never said I wouldn't come undercover, Adrian said teasingly, then walked away from the frozen Glaint with a smile. Let's go, he said, turning his back on Glaint, whose eyebrow was trembling and his expression was deeply furrowed. Breathe, Glaint, you know how Mr. Adrian is, he thought as he took several breaths as he followed Adrian. In the various letters that they exchanged in the last 4 days, Mr. Adrian always found ways to annoy him, and despite the fact that all the interaction was in the form of letters, he almost lost his temper every time he read one. Sighing heavily as he followed the man, he just kept his mouth shut lest the man bother him again. At least say something, you almost look like a duckling following its mother, Adrian said as he looked over his shoulder at the silent Glaint. A vein pulsed in his neck and he only responded with a forced smile. Sorry, Chavo, it's not my day. It took a while, but they finally left the street outside Street Eston's hospital and were now in an alleyway changing their clothes. Although Glaint was more uncomfortable doing this than Adrian, who couldn't care less. Trying to distract himself from seeing Mr. Adrian's muscular back, Glaint spoke. Mr. Adrian, how did you find me so quickly? I thought my disguise was good. Glaint asked doubtfully, and Adrian turned to look at him as he unbuckled his belt. Adrian just gave a small smile as he answered. Although your costume was very good, you forgot one very important detail. Glaint raised an eyebrow as he awkwardly removed his shirt. What would that detail be, Mr. Adrian? He asked curiously as he watched the redhead turn his body to look at him, revealing his muscular torso and large chest as well as multiple scars all over it, the biggest being claws in the middle of his chest, and he was also wearing a necklace. Glaint saw the man's 8-pack and looking down he saw his own slim figure, and this made his pride deflate quite a bit. Maybe I should train a bit. Glaint seriously considered. Adrian, unaware of the man's thoughts, replied calmly as he took off his work's boots. Your hands gave you away. Not waiting for the answer, Glaint first looked at his hands. His hands looked good, he'd even gotten them dirty with charcoal, but he'd already cleaned it off by the time they reached the alley. Returning his gaze to the man who was taking off his pants, he just turned around uncomfortably as he asked. Why, Mr. Adrian? Adrian only put the old worker's pants in the bag he had hidden here and took other pants out of it, but these were his hunting pants. As he put it on, he responded calmly but had a small smile on his face. Your hands are too clean and pretty, thought Glaint as he stared at his hands in horror, his pride as a man having been badly beaten. His hands belonged to a man, so he didn't understand what the redhead was referring to, so he turned to look at the man who was already wearing pants and new boots but also had a provocative smile. What? Glaint asked indignantly, making Adrian laugh out loud. It's because you don't have the calluses that workers should have. Your nails are also very well cared for and clean, unlike the workers whose nails are damaged and dirty. Your hands are also free of scars while the workers' hands are not. Adrian explained calmly, causing Glaint to open his mouth in surprise. When he made his butler get the clothes he would use as a disguise, he never took into account his own body when it came to disguising himself. He just sighed in defeat and quickly put the worker's shirt back in the bag he brought and took out a different one and put it on. After a while the two left the alley, only this time they both had a brown cloak covering them and also masks on their faces. Moving through various alleys, Glaint always stayed behind Adrian and as close as he could according to the man's orders. He took several breaths to calm down from time to time. His heart was excited but he was also a little scared. Excited to attend a real Beyonder party, scared to be so close to unknown Beyonders, fearing they would do something to him. He trusted Mr. Adrian in a certain way, which is why he agreed to attend. He also trusted that if something were to go wrong the man would be able to protect him. Mr. Adrian, are you sure this party is safe? Glaint asked, looking at the man's back somewhat anxiously. His hands were sweaty. This party is somewhat low level, so you don't have to worry about something happening. Adrian kept his eyes straight ahead and responded calmly. Besides, if something were to happen, the organizer and I will be able to deal with it, the masked man added jokingly, but this only made Glaint feel more anxious. Trying to distract his mind, he began to recall the details of the party that Mr. Adrian shared in the letters they exchanged. According to the man's words, it was a low-level party organized by a mysterious man called Mr. Eye of Wisdom. Here you could trade all kinds of bullets, charms, potions, amulets, weapons, and from time to time even potion formulas and Beyonder weapons. Mr. Adrian said that the so-called Mr. Eye of Wisdom can check the veracity of the potion formula at a price of 20 pounds. Mr. Adrian, is it possible that I can find the apothecary's potion formula here? Glaint asked hopefully, but Adrian shook his head. The apothecary potion formula is jealously guarded by various secret and non-secret organizations. The possibility of not only finding the potion formula but also someone willing to sell it is very low, the man explained calmly, causing Glaint's hopes to deflate. So I'm back where I started, thought Glaint, somewhat depressed as he lowered his head slightly. His hope to become an apothecary was getting smaller and smaller. But suddenly he raised his head when realizing a detail. If the formula was guarded so closely, then how did Mr. Adrian get hold of half of it? Thought Glaint, enlightened. Mr. Adrian was able to get one part, so he should be able to get the other part. Or at least know where to start looking. If it's kept so secret, then how did you get hold of it, Mr. Adrian? Glaint asked the redhead suspiciously, hoping to get more information, but the redhead only let out a soft laugh. You were taking your sweet time asking me, Glaint. I even thought you had a mental problem for not noticing that, the man said, amused, making him angry. Iaga. Glaint tried to defend himself, but out of anger he tried to speak too fast and ended up biting his tongue hard. This made Adrian laugh out loud and Glaint stare daggers at him with his eyes behind his mask as he cupped his hands over his mouth. I have my methods to obtain the formula, but if you want more information you can directly ask Father Utravsky at Harvest Church and he might give you the formula, Adrian replied, still laughing, making Glaint growl in response. Stop joking, Mr. Adrian, do you have any more information on where to get the formula? Glaint asked, trying but failing to hide his annoyance. He wasn't stupid enough to believe what Adrian said, that was asking to be killed or imprisoned. No church father would dare do that. Adrian just shrugged his shoulders as he shook his head, still looking straight ahead. I told you the best place I know, that's all I have, the redhead said flatly, making Glaint look at him dumbfounded. Before Glaint could say or do anything, Adrian stopped, and since the blonde was distracted and was following him closely, he didn't stop in time and collided with the man's back, but the redhead didn't even move or trembled. Instead, Glaint fell to the ground on his ass, grunting in pain as he stared in astonishment at the man's back. It's like running into a wall. What is this guy made of? Besides, why does he stop like that? Adrian just turned around and seeing him on the ground, he let out a soft laugh as he bent down slightly and extended his hand towards him. You have to watch where you're going, he said provocatively, making Glaint growl again as he stood up, ignoring the hand of the redhead who only pulled it back with a smile under his mask. Cleaning his cloak of dirt, he looked around the alley, only finding a metallic door at the end of it but nothing else. Why did we stop, Mr. Adrian? Glaint asked curiously. We're here, the redhead answered calmly as he went to the door he had seen before. This made Glaint look at him in surprise and then look at the metallic door in astonishment. There is the Beander party, he thought foolishly, watching as the redhead stopped in front of the door and turned to see him. This wasn't how I imagined it would be, but now that I thought about it, it made sense. Beanders outside of churches are illegal and will go to jail if caught, so their parties have to be hidden to prevent that, thought the surprised Glaint. That's why I never found one, Glaint muttered, but he watched as Adrian waved for him to come over. We don't have all day, said the redhead, causing Glaint to run towards him. Sorry, mister. Remember that from here on we won't say any names, Adrian cut Glaint off, causing the blonde to just shut his mouth as he nodded quickly. Adrian just sighed as he shook his head, making Glaint's hidden ears turn red with embarrassment. The redhead only raised his right hand towards the door and gave 2 long hits with an interval of 3 seconds and then 5 short hits with an interval of 4 seconds. All this before the curious look of Glaint, who had a raised eyebrow behind his mask. Some kind of code so that only those who know it can enter the party. Glaint assumed in his head, and he saw how the metal door was opened and a rather tall man covered in a cloak and a mask that reached to the bridge of his nose stared at them both. This made Glaint slightly nervous and he discreetly moved behind Adrian, using the redhead as a shield. When this happened, the blonde heard Adrian sigh. The look only lasted a few seconds and the man moved out of the way and Adrian entered, being followed closely by Glaint, who felt his heart almost explode with emotion. Everything that happened a few moments ago being forgotten, and he looked around in amazement. After passing a short corridor, they both entered a large room, in the middle of which there were several tables and chairs, and many of them were occupied by several people. Some were just like them, dressed in cloaks and masks that covered their entire faces except their eyes, while others were dressed in formal suits and with a mask that reached to the bridge of their nose. One of these people Glaint noticed was a man sitting in front of everyone. He was dressed in a black tuxedo, with a tall black hat and with a cane in hand. He was wearing a face mask that reached up to his nose, showing the small smile that was he carrying. That should be Mr. Eye of Wisdom, Glaint thought, looking at the man who raised his head and looked at him. This startled Glaint and he quickly lowered his head and followed Adrian to a free table. Oh goddess, Mr. Eye of Wisdom must be very strong. As soon as I looked at him for a few seconds he returned my gaze. I hope I didn't anger him, thought Glaint very nervously, while Adrian simply sit down with his arms crossed waiting for the party to start. After about 10 minutes, which Glaint counted every second in his head, and seeing that no one else arrived, Mr. Eye of Wisdom got up from his seat and spoke loudly, covering the entire room. Seeing that some friends didn't come, we will have to start the party. For the new members, let me introduce myself. I am Mr. Eye of Wisdom and I am the organizer of this party, the man introduced himself, giving a soft bow. The rules are simple. No making trouble in the party or you will be expelled. No attacking other members while they are in this party. Lastly, do not talk about any god here, whether it is official or not. if you do so you will be expelled. The man spoke seriously, making Glaint swallow a little saliva. Let the party begin, Mr. Eye of Wisdom said as he sat down in his chair.